an original.
From Story Studio Network.
I'm Tom Hoppe, and I'm your host of the Most Painful Podcast. On our last show, we spoke to Tanya Yardley, who spoke about brain health and the advancements and assessments and treatments for brain injuries. So if you missed this episode, you can listen to it on our Spotify and Apple feed, and to receive notifications for the most up-to-date episodes, subscribe to the show. In Season 5, Episode 6, we spoke to Andrew Thomas, a former veteran and physiotherapist from Canadian Forces, and he talked about some highlights and benefits on cold water therapy. Since we recorded that episode, there has been some more research on the benefits and dangers on the use of cold water therapy and breath work. To talk about that today, I'm joined by Dr. Markus Besemann, who's the medical director for the Beechwood Physical Medical Clinic in Ottawa. Markus, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom.
And also by Dr. Francois Hanman, who's with the Faculty of Health Science at the University of Ottawa. Francois, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom.
So you're both here to talk about, I know Markus, you and I have talked about this offline. You've conducted some research on cold water therapy as well as on breath work. The benefits and the dangers. So maybe we can start by just talking about a quick short review on what is cold water therapy. Francois, you want to take that one?
Yeah, for sure. So what's interesting with cold is I've been studying for about 20 years, if not 25. I started my PhD on cold research back in 2000. And it's amazing where the field has gone. So one of the things that I kind of realize is a lot of the information people are getting right now is coming from social media or coming a lot from word of mouth, where people are kind of hearing these methods, hearing what Wim Hof has been doing with the Wim Hof method. But it's funny that there's that huge disconnect between research that's been done for all these years and was actually happening in the field. And I think what we need to do is to be able to bring these together. So one of these concepts that is important is also to understand the benefits of cold immersion and understand that this is not a new practice. This has been done for thousands of years. It's been used by many people over the years for different benefits. Biologically, the benefits are basically reducing pain. So you are releasing endorphins. You are releasing dopamine, which is a feel-good hormone. And you're also stimulating your body. So basically releasing stress hormones. So these are the well-known benefits that we have. But over social media, and research has looked at this, we've been giving all kinds of other important effects of cold related to inflammation, the effects on the immune system, which none of it has been proven scientifically. And we've forgotten completely any potential risk, especially when it comes to ice water dipping, any potential risk that could come from that extreme exposure.
Yeah, because I hear that a lot with cold water therapy. You know, go into cold water, try to extend your time, all that kind of stuff. And like you said, a lot of it comes off social media. So Markus, I don't know if you can add something to what Francois was saying about, you know, what really is cold water therapy, and then maybe we can get into the research.
Yeah, I think just to backtrack a very, very short snippet of how Francois and I connected, it was actually through a NATO working group in Arlington, Virginia, on cold water and specifically cold weather operations for our NATO troops. And what struck me most is Francois' no-nonsense attitude to things that may not necessarily always be scientifically proven, but that we intuitively just have a sense for. And I think if the word sense can be used in the context of treating veterans with chronic pain, what I've seen over and over again is, as you well know as a veteran, Tom, we teach soldiers to get out of their body to get the job done. And that does well until it doesn't, and until pain comes knocking and gets you back into your body by violent force, if I may ask. So the business of getting reconnected with a body with whom you've been disconnected for your entire career is no easy task. And in fact, it's probably the most threatening environment that those soldiers don't want to go back to, as strange as that sounds. So cold water immersion, whether it's a cold shower, as Andrew had mentioned, or whether it's actually going into ice baths, it's a way of getting you to feel something. And even if that feeling is a threat, you know that you have everything in you to navigate through that threat. And I think that's where the benefit of it from a therapeutic perspective comes, is getting people reconnected with their body, knowing that they have everything they need to navigate that uncomfortable, but in the short term at least not life-threatening stimulus, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Maybe you can expand on that a little bit to kind of make sense of what that means by, I understand connecting the body. I get what that means, but maybe take that a little deeper on why that's important.
So when I ask most soldiers, what do you feel? And you probably can guess the answer. It's usually anger. And I say, well, anger is not a sensation. Something in your body must be giving you a signal. And it's essentially a void. Most special forces people we see below the neck, there's nothing there. And so getting them in the cold water, and Francois can speak to that later, we see responses that for the first time actually get them reconnected to their nervous system, get them reconnected to parts of their body they had literally, for lack of a better word, amputated. And many of the mechanisms of chronic pain, as we know, is when your brain literally treats your body like an appendage and amputates your nervous system, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and if I can add to this, because I think this is a very good point that Markus is making. So I'm a biologist by training, so I've studied extreme environments all my life, and I've studied different types of animals. Now I work primarily with military across NATO, a lot of work with the US, and one thing we need to remember is cold exposure is an extreme stimuli. It's actually an extreme stress. So you're putting your body through something, especially when you go into ice water. You know, the most extreme condition you can get would be lack of oxygen. If I cut all the oxygen to your brain, you got a few minutes to live. But cold would be the second one in terms of the level of stress. So you will enter a fight or flight situation when you go into cold water and into ice water. So I think part of the feeling aspect of it is also being able to understand how my body responds to this condition. And in a lot of soldiers, what you see is we have the impression that pushing harder all the time is the way to fix everything. And you just keep pushing. If I say 2 minutes of ice water dipping is good, soldiers, especially with special forces, are going to be doing it for 20 minutes because it's 10 times better. But the reality of it is, this is an extreme stimuli. And the purpose of going into ice water, even though we think they're all biological benefits, it's about learning how to regain control. And this control could be lost in many different ways, going into battle, facing a bear when you're hiking in the woods. Could be a different type of stress. Now you're using cold as a training tool. And I think the whole aspect that we're talking about is by feeling, you're able to learn how to regain control, whatever conditions you're going to be facing.
Yeah, so this conversation is taking it different for me, because I always think of the health benefits but we're actually talking about how to connect with your body in a sense. And I guess I would apply to anybody, even someone who may have been in a traumatic incident, in a car accident or something. This is that same kind of disconnect, and you're trying to reconnect them to the body. That's one thing I'm taking away from this. The second one, as you're saying, Francois, is it's a stimuli as well too, right? To stimulate that body. So, okay, so now that's the one component of ice or cold water therapy. What else can cold water therapy help us with? And then maybe, halfway through, we can start talking about the dangers and things we should be aware of.
So I might just continue on the thought about what else it can help us with. And then I can have Markus step in, because I think it would be a great segue to what Markus can talk about with breath work. But the whole idea is when you're facing cold, you're going to get initially a cold shock. As soon as you hit that water, the first shock you're going to get, well documented by Dr. Michael Tipton from University of Portsmouth, cold shock can actually kill more people than the actual hypothermia of being in water, because cold shock will create a deep breath. You're going to inhale about a liter of air, which if your head is underwater, you will drown. So cold shock is what you're going to be fighting in the first 30 seconds. And this is where the magic time is occurring. And this is where regaining control occurs. Anything following the cold shock is all the cherry on the sundae, where everything becomes far more, I got to stay within this control and that meditative state. So Markus, if you want to take it away in terms of how you regain control, because I think this is the most fascinating thing about using cold.
Absolutely. And when we see this, there are various responses. And for some reason, Francois can speak to it better than I can, that women actually seem to be doing better in the cold than men. And in the numbers of veterans we've seen so far, that's been the case. And in fact, women seem to be embracing this more, sometimes too much. As Francois said, some of them are doing it for 20 minutes, which is way, way too long. But if the first response of, rather than taking that big inspiration, can be to blow out, and in fact, if the person accompanying the member is right in front of them, looking them in the eye, and being there as a shepherd, so to speak, or if you want a sentry for military parlance, and gives them the hand as a guide to say, look, blow my hand away. Just that simple act of, rather than sucking in that liter of air, blowing someone's hand away suddenly in an instant changes everything. And that face that goes from one of severe horror, and sometimes I can describe it only in those terms, quickly relaxes. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. But if we let people do this on their own without any guidance, I think the risk is that they could potentially start hyperventilating, which would defeat the entire purpose.
Yeah, and I think about doing ice water rescue where you get that, I understand that first gasp. And that's where you put your hand over your mouth and you go in so you're not sucking all the water in. So I like the idea of pushing that out. But like you're saying, this is about, I guess it's more about this psychological and maybe the physical control of who you are as a person, right? So that and correct me if I'm wrong, it's the connection to self first, but then also controlling the physical reaction of cold, which kind of brings awareness. Is that what we're talking about in a sense?
Yeah. So when you look at the main benefits, and again, Dr. Tipton wrote a very good paper on this, and he showed a very interesting diagram. So the biological effects, we know endorphins are released, dopamine and stress hormones. So we know this is occurring. But the other component in terms of psychology, it's a sense of achievement. I've been in ice water and I've regained control. And we often need to find, I don't know why we are like this with our humans, we need to find the exact reason. It has to be biological. No, sometimes it's just your mindset, and your mindset has changed. And the way you see things, suddenly that stress, which is extreme to your body, you've regained control under these conditions. So there's a whole sense of achievements. There's a sense of belonging. Often we do this alone. We do this in groups. One thing to remember, and we'll talk about it at the end, you have to do this well accompanied. We'll talk about this, and always with a buddy system. You don't go in there without somebody. And this is something I teach. When I worked in Finland, you always had a buddy system. You never left anybody alone. And so you get that sense of belonging, and sometimes you can do it outside, feels awesome. Doesn't matter what the external temperature is. So these are the main benefits. I do it regularly. And what I like the most about it is being with buddies, and we go in and friends and we do it and we enjoy it. But it's about respecting yourself also. And I think, Marcus, we should talk about this now, is the idea that it's an individual experience. Mm-hmm. It's about you. It's not about anybody else. And we really make a point in the stuff that we do to tell people, this is your own journey. This is not somebody else's journey. The way you're going to feel is yours.
Absolutely. Exactly. As Francois said, there's so much being talked about now in terms of personalized medicine. And that, as someone once told me, and see one concussion, you've seen one concussion. I think if you've seen one chronic pain patient, you've seen one chronic pain patient. They're not the same, and veterans are not all the same. And just in terms of the trauma-informed care, and why the other branch of what we're doing with heart rate variability and looking whether people are in a high sympathetic state or low sympathetic state. In other words, people all know about the fight or flight response, the freeze response, and then even the fawn response. And I loved what Andrew said in his podcast when he'd first done this. He basically couldn't sleep all night. Well, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending if he was already jacked up beforehand. And we've just jacked him up that much further. A lot of our guys don't need to be driven more sympathetically. And so Francois's got this great term scientifically. It's called rah-rah. If you get a bunch of guys together jumping in the ice water, just going rah-rah, and they're already all pumped up, it's the wrong thing to do. So we need to decide which patient needs which approach and how to do it properly, as opposed to lumping everybody in this group setting. And some people will get totally jacked up, and some people might actually literally freeze response, but not in the thermic way.
And I think that contrasts a lot what Wim Hof has been doing in some of the methods and some popular methods, that it's one size fits all. If there's one thing probably Marcus remember from the work I did with NATO, and we wrote papers on this, cold exposure is not one size fits all. Every single person will respond differently in the cold. It depends on your cold injury history. It depends on your cardiovascular system. It depends on many, many things. And again, I've worked with many people around the world, put a lot of people in the cold. And what you realize is not one person responds the same way. So again, the point is, it might not be for everybody. You cannot generalize. And there's no linear thinking about cold will fix everything. It is not the magic bullet. If you're looking for a magic bullet, that's not the way to go.
Yeah, I know, because I've slept in Arctic tents. I've been out minus 40, 50. I don't like cold water. Just It is what it is. But when you talk about, and you just kind of touched on it a bit, Francois, and the two of you can probably discuss this. We talked about the psychology and in touch with oneself, but what about things like metabolic health and cardio? Is there scientific research supporting that it improves metabolic health?
So it depends how you define metabolic health. So I tend to talk about it more in terms of physiological function. So anytime you stress your body, there will be an acclimation process where your body will get used to these conditions. Again, ice water might not be the best way it is actually not the best way to cold acclimatize, but your body will get used to whatever extreme temperature you're exposing it to. Part of these changes are partly metabolic. So there would be similar metabolic changes that you would get with exercise, for example. Like for me, exercise remains. Eating well and exercising remains the best way, and sleeping the best way to deal with most of the stressors and to stay healthy. Cold alone, just doing cold exposure without sleeping well, eating well, hydrating yourself, reducing your stress will have no impact, right? It's going to be one more thing you can add. If it can change your behavior, then it's going to have tremendous impact. But, health is something that is it's a matrix. It's not a linear thing where it's not one thing that will fix it. You got to look at it as a matrix. And I think cold could be part of the solution if it allows you to make some behavioral changes to actually feel better and make better decisions. So I believe that. Do I believe cold alone can improve health? Probably not.
So what I'm hearing you say, I think from both of you, is just like you said, Francois, it's not about health, but it's more about behavior changes or reconnection in that sense. And it's just another tool in the tool bag of wellness that we use for our body. Would that sum it up properly? Or?
Yeah, it would sum it up. And the other thing you learn with cold, and Marcus, I'd like you to talk about this, is the effect to learn about breathing. So you kind of addressed it, but breathing is the entryway to your vagal system. It's the entryway to your nervous system. And it's a way of regaining control on your body. And I think we underestimate that aspect of it when it comes to cold, because again, through that very intense stress, you learn how to regulate your breath. So Marcus, I don't know if you want to discuss this.
Absolutely. At Beechwood Physical Medicine, the clinic I work at for veterans care, most of whom have chronic pain and various mental health conditions associated. We have these group chronic pain education sessions, and one of the things that seems to have resonated the most is the work by James Nestor. In fact, every veteran, I think, with chronic pain needs to read that book, James Nestor's book on breath. And there is no doubt that of all the physiologic parameters that we can modulate and that have been used therapeutically over the millennia, breath is the single most important and likely biggest bang for your buck by far, right? So you're right, Francois, like the cold is essentially the driver that forces you to get into the breathwork mode that's going to be the most beneficial to allow you to survive that onslaught of this really stressful stimulus, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it could be heat. Also, it could be, you go into a very intense sauna, breathing to calm your mind. I do scuba diving. When I go scuba diving, the way I breathe has tremendous impact on not only my consumption of air, but also on my regulation of my heart rate. So there's a direct relationship between heart rate response and your breath. And the cardiovascular system responds very quickly to changes in breathing. So one thing you learn with these extreme stressors is actually how to regulate your level of stress, but also how to regulate your cardiovascular system.
When you talk about breath work, and with veterans, and I'm thinking about, the mindfulness and breath work, and I'm guilty of this myself, I find that a number of veterans find it hard to sit still, find it hard to do and maybe as a group we do it, but then when we're on our own, and it's almost, a friend I know who's an airborne, he's a Ranger guy, and he says he can't do that, but he can go fishing or do something. Yeah. So as part of the cold immersion, then is that, I know it's behavior change, but does it help to actually, and I don't know, it's because if we're wired this way to always just be go, 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 does it kind of slow a person down to actually be able to sit still and do the breath work? Or is it a way of doing breath work while you're under stress, while you're still kind of active versus sitting still and doing nothing? Does that make sense?
Marcus laugh. Yeah, it makes sense 100%. I'm going to make Marcus laugh because he knows that for me to sit down and meditate is virtually impossible. So
good. I'm not the only one.
No. I'm actually awful at it. So I come from a military family. I grew up with kind of high intensity type of homes, played a lot of sports, self-diagnosed with ADHD. Everybody that I've seen around the world that I've worked with, and that are soldiers, they tend to be active people. And the whole idea of sitting down and meditating is a bit challenging. So finding a way to do it under stress, which is kind of funny because you would think that would not be the best way to do it, but is actually the way to do it. So you can meditate walking, you can be rock marching and meditating, you can be doing ice water, you can do whatever you want, but that meditative state is what you're going to be feeling. And whether you do it while doing the plank or you're doing it, you don't have to do it sitting down. You can do it in any type of condition. So again, for me, this is the tools that you learn how to regain control of your ultimate weapon system, which is your body. And your body allows you to function to your maximum. So I think the breath is the entryway to all of this.
And I am smiling, Francois. Thank you for those of you in Radio Land. But if you look at the definition of what meditation is, right, it's so simple. And I tell soldiers this all the time. It's non-judgmental present moment awareness, right? John Kabat-Zinn in the 70s defined it that way. Non-judgmental present moment awareness. If anything brings you into the present moment, it's having your gonads strike that ice water and pulling up so high that you probably can feel them near your earlobes. And sorry for the women in the audience, there's probably a corollary to that, but that present moment awareness is going to be quickly coupled with a judgment call. I hate this. I don't want to be here. I want to get the hell out of this. And this is not fun. It's not pleasant. And I don't like this. And what if you could just say, it's just cold water, right? And like so many things we confront day-to-day life, it's an annoying stimulus. The driver who's tailgating you is just a driver who's tailgating you. Right? And that's what we can cultivate with cold water immersion, full, non-judgmental, present moment awareness, because at the end of the day, it's just cold water.
And what about, because I know we're getting close to the end here, but just quickly on, I know after we did the Alpine hike with the veterans there, we always go to the spa in Whistler, and they, when you enter the spa, they say, okay, we want you to do the hot and cold plunge. I mean, that's in a sense, you're heating your body up and then you're going into a cold immersion pool. Is there really benefits with that, or is that a myth that's been around for a long time?
Yeah, so the idea of myth, again, anecdotal evidence is still evidence. So if people feel good doing it, it's good on them. So there are potential benefits. Heat is well known to have a lot of benefits when it comes to cardiovascular system. This is well documented. Scandinavian research has shown it repeatedly with sauna. Very well documented that sauna is actually really helping on the cardiovascular side. Way less is known on cold when it comes to the cardiovascular system. So doing contrasting bath, again, the whole idea is often, if you want to be repeated cycles, you can't just stay in the heat for 30 minutes. You do a bit of cold, you cool down, and then you go back in. A lot of Scandinavians don't go to these extremes. They're not going to jump in ice water. They might just go outside, cool down in the snow, and then go back in. And that's the way you can do multiple cycles. So the biological benefits are not that clear of contrasting baths. A lot of people make a lot of these, kind of biased type of comments about what it does. But biologically, there hasn't been much good work. So it doesn't mean that it's published, that it's necessarily good work, but good work done on this and good data that we have to confirm that contrasting baths actually are going to be better than just doing heat or cold.
Okay. So we're going to, I think we talked about some of the dangers. I guess the first one that pops into my mind is there, as you age and you get older, can the stresses of cold water therapy be hard on the cardiovascular system? Maybe we can start the whole danger side of cold water therapy by answering that question.
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in there. I think one word that people need to really get into their minds is this term called window of tolerance. My wife, Mary, works at the clinic as a psychotherapist and sees lots of veterans, often uses that. So we have arcs of fire emotionally and physically that we often limit ourselves to. And so your question, should somebody who's never done this before at a certain age where their cardiovascular system, for all intents and purposes, is quite rigid. I mean, whether it's calcified or not is another story, but that window of tolerance, the elasticity, which of all organ systems, I mean, your heart is the most probably grossly elastic organ in your body, and the blood vessels the same. And that window of tolerance from heat to cold, to me, is just a metaphor for how our bodies have to adapt to various climatic and various other stressors. And then whether it's an emotional stress or a physical stress, we need to develop that tolerance. But you don't develop that tolerance overnight. And this is the fallacy Francois and I were laughing at when people were saying, how do we get warriors to fight wars at minus 60? And our suggestion, or maybe I should say, I think there should be a moratorium, just like the Geneva Convention, that it's just plain stupid to do that, because there are some things you cannot adapt to. And Francois's got this great metaphor with Everest, the death zone above 8,000 meters, And so for someone who's never acclimatized to going to the sauna and doing a cold plunge, and at 75 decides they're going to do it, it's just plain stupid. I hate to say it, it's just plain stupid. But that would seem intuitive to most of us. You have to adapt to new environments, and you do so in a gradual fashion.
So, and your cardiovascular system, you got to remember two things. There's going to be a vagal shock. So the first thing you're going to get is vagal shock, which again could cause a cardiac event. The other component of it is blood pressure flies up, and blood pressure will go up very quickly because all the blood will rush into the core. All of these things together, if your cardiovascular system is not in place to take this, like Marcus was saying about plasticity, you could end up with cardiac events pretty rapidly. And they could be pretty dramatic. If I'm doing this in ice water, I'm alone. I'm not well coached. We do this when we're doing it with soldiers on bases. We got an ambulance, we got medics present, we got a defibrillator. I have constantly a defibrillator in my truck, because everywhere I go when we do ice water dipping, I have the defibrillator with me. That's the only thing that's going to save people's lives. And the reality of it is, nobody that's been coaching this, and all these experts from Wim Hof coaching and these experts of cold water dipping are taking these precautions. So, these risks are tremendous. And I'm just talking about the cardiovascular system. So if you want, we can also talk about the tissue damage that is done by repeated cold exposure. Yeah,
we have about 2 minutes left, so we can do a quick chat on just some more of those dangers that people should consider before, like you said, doing it alone is one of them.
Yeah, so being progressive is a very clear one. So Marcus and I have discussed this many times. You have to do it progressively. Why jump in ice water? I've never exercised, and the first thing I'm going to do is go sprint 100 meters. Not the smartest thing to do. It's exactly the same idea. I've never climbed a mountain, and I'm going to get dropped off on the summit of Everest. Okay, well, not the brightest idea. So you got to get used to this. And again, doing base camps up is probably the way to do it. So the first one is progressive. You have to do it with a buddy system. For sure. You do have to protect your hands and feet. And this is the one that nobody thinks about. And the most well documented since the First World War, and Marcus, you can add to this, is actually trench foot. And trench foot is tremendously well known. I've seen it, which is basically non-freezing cold injuries, extremely well documented within NATO, within Nordic countries. These injuries are actually debilitating, and you will end up with huge problems and could actually end your careers. And I've seen it in many places in Nordic countries. So Marcus, I don't know if you want to add to that idea of trench foot, but...
Yeah, it is. It comes up gradually. You might not feel it, but it is one of the consequences of regular, prolonged, non-freezing cold injuries. So definitely protecting your hands and feet is the most important thing besides the cardiovascular issues you just talked about.
Yeah, and these are permanent neuropathies, so they're not going anywhere. So basically, once you're injured for life. And the next time you're going to face cold, you're going to be completely intolerant to cold. And you have to monitor yourself, and you might have to, get a good cardiovascular checkup to make sure that your cardiovascular system is actually in check and you're in good shape to be able to do this. And I think the one we often forget, and I've seen this with a lot of veterans from Canadian Special Forces, and one of my good friends that has done it recently, and he went in and he looked at me and goes, Francois, this is not my day. And he walked out of the ice water. And he goes, I've had a lot of stress this week. I'm not doing well. And this is not the right decision right now for me to get in ice water. And he hasn't been back in the ice water since that time. And there's something to learn. If you want to learn something about ice water, learn to be humble, because Mother Nature will kick your ass.
Yeah. I mean, we see that just when people go out skiing and they fall through the ice, or they go skating and fall through the ice, right? Survival rates are not good with that. I mean, we could probably talk about, and I got a bunch more questions in my mind, but unfortunately we're out of time. So maybe we'll have to do part 2 of this.
I'd have to do part 2.
Yeah, I'd like to talk more about the research, because I think it is important for people to do this right. Because this was, I went into this thinking one thing and then coming out learning something else. So it's been helpful. And I'd like to thank both of you, for Marcus and Francois, for being on the show today.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
And this ends season 6. We've had 6 seasons of the Most Painful podcast, and we are going to have a season 7, and that'll come out in the fall of 2025, winter in 2026, so watch out for that. For feedback about the show or more information on chronic pain, you can visit our website, veteranschronicpain.ca. There you can follow us on Facebook and X at Chronic Pain COE, and on Instagram at chronicpain_COE. For the audience, stay safe and keep the hope alive.
The Most Painful Podcast is produced for the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence by Story Studio Network.